Chapter 1. A broken engagement. I never thought I'll be the kind of man to walk in on my fiancé screwing my cousin. But there I was, standing at the doorway of my penthouse, watching the woman I was supposed to marry, moaning beneath a man who shared my blood. I didn't feel rage at first, just a hollow, empty silence in my chest. She didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in her own pleasure. But then, as if sensing my presence, she turned her head, her face frozen in horror when our eyes met. "Liam!" she gasped, scrambling to cover herself with the sheets. My cousin, my flesh and blood, looked at me with that same arrogant smirk he always wore. Well, this is awkward. I clenched my fists, feeling a sharp, cold kind of fury settle over me. Not the explosive, uncontrolled kind. No, this was the kind that burned slow and deep, the kind that left scars long after the fire had died out. I had trusted her. I had been willing to marry her. Not because I was head over heels in love, but because it was expected of me, because it was time to settle down, to build a family, to produce an heir. My grandmother had been pressuring me for months, reminding me that the Sinclair legacy had to continue, that I needed a wife, a child, a future. She had been thrilled when I proposed to Bianca. But now, standing in this room, watching her betrayal unfold before me, I realized I'd almost made the biggest mistake of my life. Bianca's lips trembled. I can explain. Don't. My voice was calm, detached. Just get out, she blinked. Liam, please, I made a mistake. I don't care. She started crying, pleading, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The disgust curling in my stomach was unbearable. My cousin didn't even look ashamed. He just leaned back, stretching lazily, as if this was just another night to him. This wasn't personal, he said, pulling on his pants. She just wanted a real man. I saw red for a brief moment, but I reined it in. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't say another word. Didn't even let Bianca's sobs follow me. I left everything behind, the apartment, the engagement, the carefully laid out future that had been planned for me. Let it burn. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already ringing. I sighed, leaning against the sleek black vehicle as I checked the screen. Grandmother, of course. I answered, bracing myself. Liam, her sharp voice cut through the speaker. I just heard from Bianca. What the hell happened? I ran a hand over my jaw, my patience already wearing thin. You tell me, Grandmother. Apparently, she was bored of waiting for our wedding night and decided to take my cousin for a test drive. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then, unacceptable. No argument there. You're not going to call off the engagement over one indiscretion, are you? I let out a humorless laugh. One indiscretion? I caught them in my own bed. Then take care of it. You don't have time for foolish pride. Unbelievable. She wasn't even angry at Bianca, just annoyed that the engagement was now an inconvenience. I'm done, I said, my voice steel. The engagement is off. You need a wife, Liam. No, I need a drink. You will regret this. I ended the call before she could continue, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. My entire life I had been groomed for this role. The next Sinclair, to lead the family empire. Wealth, power, control. It was all mine. But that wasn't enough for my grandmother. She wanted me married, producing heirs, securing the family's future. But after tonight, I realized something. I wasn't going to marry for convenience. If I was going to have a wife, if I was going to have a family, it sure as hell wasn't going to be built on betrayal and expectation. And so, for the first time in my life, I decided to walk away. From Bianca, from my grandmother's demands, from the entire damn plan. What I didn't know then was that fate had another plan for me, and it started with a desperate woman who was about to turn my world upside down. Chapter 2. A desperate woman. A week had passed since I walked away from Bianca and the life I was supposed to have. I buried myself in work, avoiding my grandmother's constant calls and ignoring the whispers in my social circles. The Sinclair heir calling off an engagement was enough to make the headlines, but I didn't care. Let them talk. Tonight, I attended a high-profile charity gala, not because I wanted to, but because it was easier than listening to my grandmother complain about my absence. The Sinclair name had a reputation to uphold, and I was still the face of it, even if my personal life was a mess. I was halfway through my third drink when I saw her. At first, she was just another face in the crowd, but then I noticed her again, arguing with security at the entrance, her hands gripping the lapels of her cheap coat as she pleaded with the guard. Her desperation was palpable. She wasn't part of the elite crowd gathered in the ballroom. Her dress was simple, not designer. Her hair was pulled back hastily, strands falling over her face. She looked out of place among the diamonds and tuxedos, but something about her made it impossible to look away. I wasn't the only one who noticed her struggle. Several people were already whispering, their judgmental eyes watching the scene unfold. I should have ignored it. Instead, I found myself walking toward her. The guard spotted me first, his posture stiffening. "Mr. Sinclair." The woman turned, and I got my first proper look at her. Wide, tired eyes, soft lips pressed into a determined line, shadows of exhaustion under her skin, but a fire in her gaze that told me she wasn't one to give up easily. "Is there a problem?" I asked. The guard hesitated, glancing between us. "She's not on the guest list, sir." "Then she's with me." Her lips parted slightly, eyes narrowing in suspicion. The guard nodded immediately, stepping aside. I turned to the woman, tilting my head. "Are you coming in, or do you prefer making a scene?" She hesitated, then stepped inside. The moment we were away from the entrance, she turned to face me, arms crossed. "Why did you do that?" "You were disrupting the event," I said smoothly, taking a sip of my drink. She scoffed. "Right. A billionaire like you just happens to play hero?" I smirked. "You don't look like you belong here." Wow, that's not condescending at all. I liked her fire. Most women in these circles knew my name, my wealth, and they bent over backward to impress me. But she looked at me like I was an inconvenience. I leaned in slightly. "Tell me, why were you so desperate to get in?" Her lips pressed together before she sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I need to speak to Lawrence Kensington." That caught my attention. Kensington was one of the biggest philanthropists in the city. He donated millions every year, but he was also ruthless when it came to business. If she was trying to reach him, it had to be important. "And what does a woman like you want from a man like Kensington?" Her jaw tightened. "Money. Honest. I like that." "For what?" I pressed. She inhaled sharply, her gaze flickering away before meeting mine again. "My little brother needs surgery. The hospital won't move forward without a down payment, She stopped, swallowing hard. I thought I could convince Mr. Kensington to help. I studied her. She wasn't lying. "You do know how these events work, right?" I asked. "Kensington won't just hand over money because you ask nicely." Her fingers curled into fists. "I have no choice. He'll do whatever it takes." Dangerous words. I let them settle between us, then took another sip of my drink. "You're in luck," she frowned. "What?" "You're asking the wrong billionaire." I tilted my head. "You should be asking me." Her whole body went still. "What?" "He'll pay for the surgery. No questions asked." She stared at me like she didn't believe me. Why? Because I was curious about her. Because she was the first thing to interest me in weeks. Because I had the money and she had nothing. And for once, I wanted to see what it felt like to hold that kind of power over someone who wasn't already playing the game. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smirked. "Because I can." She shook her head. "I don't want charity." "Then I'll make you a deal." Her brows furrowed. "What kind of deal?" I leaned in, my voice lowering. "Be my fiancé." Her breath hitched. "Excuse me?" "My grandmother is on my back about marriage. She wants an heir, a family, the whole package. I need a distraction, someone who can make her back off." "You need money. It's a win-win." She gaped at me. "You're insane, impractical." "You want me to pretend to be engaged to you?" "For 1 month." She let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You don't even know my name." I shrugged. "Then introduce yourself." She hesitated, then exhaled. "Emma. Emma." The name settled in my mind, more familiar than I wanted it to be. I didn't know why, but something about her nagged at the back of my mind. Like I'd seen her before, like I should remember. But I brushed the thought away. "So?" I asked. "Do we have a deal?" Emma's lips parted slightly. I could see the war going on inside her. She needed the money, but she didn't trust me. Smart woman. But she didn't have a choice. And in that moment, as she looked up at me, I knew. Whatever this was, it was going to change everything for both of us. Chapter 3. An offer she can't refuse. Emma was staring at me like I'd grown 2 heads. "You want me to do what?" she asked, her voice sharp and full of disbelief. I kept my expression neutral, swirling the remaining liquid in my glass. "Be my fiancé for 1 month." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're serious. Very." She shook her head, stepping back as if she needed distance from the sheer insanity of my proposal. No, absolutely not. I arched a brow. Why not? Because it's ridiculous, she snapped. You're a billionaire, for God's sake. You could have any woman in this entire ballroom begging to be your fake fiancé. Why me? Because you're desperate. Because you don't want my money without giving something in return. Because there's something about you that I can't put my finger on, and I want to know why. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I leaned in slightly, my voice calm and measured. Because you need me just as much as I need you. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. My grandmother won't back off until I find a wife, I continued. You need money for your brother's surgery. It's a simple exchange. You pretend to be my fiancé, and I'll make sure he gets the best care money can buy. Emma's lips parted slightly, her resistance flickering under the weight of reality. She knew I was right. She needed this. Still, she hesitated, crossing her arms. And what exactly would this arrangement involve? I smirked. Public appearances, family dinners, a few carefully staged moments to make it look real. She narrowed her eyes. And behind closed doors? I let the tension stretch between us before answering. Whatever we decide, her cheeks flushed. I don't sleep with men for money. I chuckled, amused. Good. I don't pay for sex. She looked away, chewing on her lip. And at the end of the month? I shrugged. We go our separate ways. No strings attached. Emma exhaled, rubbing her temples. This is insane. Maybe. I took a step closer, my voice dropping. But do you really have a better option? Her breath hitched, and I knew she was out of excuses. She didn't want this, but she needed it, and I needed her. Fine, she whispered. Satisfaction curled in my chest. Good choice. Emma crossed her arms, looking up at me with fire in her eyes. But let's get one thing straight, Sinclair. This is business, nothing more. I smirked. Whatever you say, sweetheart. But deep down, I already knew. This was going to be anything but just business. Chapter 4. The first signs of trouble. I wasn't used to second-guessing my decisions. In my world, I made a deal. I sealed it, and I moved on. But as I sat across from Emma in my private car, watching her fingers twist in her lap, I had the distinct feeling that this arrangement was going to be anything but simple. She was still in disbelief, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past us. The tension between us was thick, an invisible weight pressing down on both of us. I glanced at her. Regretting your decision already? She exhaled slowly before turning to me. I can't believe I agreed to this. Neither can I admitted, stretching my legs. But here we are. She shot me a look, but it wasn't as sharp as before. There was something else in her eyes now, uncertainty, maybe even curiosity. I need to be there for my brother, she said after a long pause. If this arrangement means I can help him, then I'll play along, but I need to know what I'm walking into. I respected that. She was cautious, not naive. You'll move in with me, I said, watching her reaction closely. Her spine stiffened. Excuse me? If this is going to be believable, you can't be living in a shoebox apartment. I don't live in a shoebox, she muttered. I raised a brow. Fine, but you can't stay there, she frowned. And why is that? Because my grandmother is going to want proof. You'll be under her microscope the moment she hears about this. Emma chewed on her lower lip, considering. I had a feeling she wasn't used to giving up control. She wasn't used to men like me, men who didn't just ask for things but expected them to be done. Finally, she exhaled. Fine, but in bringing my brother with me, that surprised me. Your brother? Yes, her voice was firm, unwavering. He's 5 years old, and I'm not leaving him. I wasn't sure why that made my chest tighten, but I ignored the feeling. Fine, I nodded. He stays with you. She blinked, as if she expected me to argue. I leaned back in my seat. What else? She hesitated. I need to keep my job. What do you do? She shifted uncomfortably. I work at a cafe. I frowned. Not anymore. Her eyes flashed. Excuse me? Emma, you're about to be engaged to a billionaire. Do you really think my grandmother is going to believe you're working the counter at a coffee shop? Her fingers curled into fists. I like my job. Then he'll find you something better. She glared at me. I don't need you controlling my life. I'm not controlling it, I said smoothly. I'm making sure this doesn't fall apart. You agreed to this arrangement, and that means you play the part. Emma clenched her jaw, but she knew I was right. Finally, she huffed. Fine, good, I smirked. Now, one last thing, she folded her arms. What? I leaned in slightly, letting my voice drop. You'll have to get used to being touched. Her breath hitched. What? In public. We'll need to be affectionate, hand-holding, kisses, the whole act. My grandmother won't buy this otherwise. Emma swallowed hard. I watched her closely, saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, and then slowly she lifted her chin. I can handle it. I grinned. Well, see. The car slowed as we pulled up to my penthouse. This is your last chance to back out, I said, watching her carefully. Once we walk through those doors, there's no going back. Emma hesitated for only a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and met my gaze head on. I'm in. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment my life changed forever. Chapter 5. The Valentine's Promise. I had officially lost my mind. There was no other explanation for why I was currently standing in the doorway of Liam Sinclair's penthouse, my fingers trembling as I clutched my small suitcase. A billionaire. A man who had power, wealth, and an ego the size of this ridiculous apartment. And I had just agreed to pretend to be engaged to him. All because I was desperate. Because my little brother, Ethan, needed surgery, and I didn't have another way to save him. You're standing there like you've been kidnapped. Liam's deep voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He stood behind me, watching me with those sharp, unreadable eyes. Regretting your decision already? I forced myself to breathe. No, liar. His lips twitched slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he walked past me into the enormous living room, leaving me to follow. Everything about his home screamed wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Expensive furniture, so sleek and modern it looked uncomfortable, decorated the space. A massive fireplace crackled in the corner, casting warm golden light across the polished marble floors. I felt out of place instantly. This is nice, I said lamely. Liam smirked. I'll give you a tour later. For now, let's go over the rules. Rules. Of course. I turned to face him, folding my arms. Go ahead. Liam's gaze dropped to my stance, as if amused by my attempt at defiance. Rule number 1, in public, you're my fiancé. You act like it, speak like it, and... He took a step closer, his scent invading my space. Touch me like it. I tensed. Touch you? He tilted his head slightly, studying me. We'll need to be convincing. My grandmother isn't stupid. If you flinch every time I touch you, she'll know something's off. I swallowed hard. I hadn't thought about that. The idea of being affectionate with Liam made my skin prickle in ways I wasn't ready to examine. Fine, I said, lifting my chin. I'll touch you. A slow smirk curled at the corner of his lips, and my stomach twisted uncomfortably. Rule number 2, he continued. You don't leave this apartment without me. I frowned. Excuse me? My family will have eyes on you. If you're caught sneaking off to your real life, it'll ruin everything. Real life, right? The life I had before I walked into this madness. I clenched my fists. I need to visit Ethan. You'll be able to, but he'll take you. I hated the idea of being under his control, but he was right. If we were going to make this work, we had to be careful. Fine, I muttered. He nodded, satisfied. Rule number 3, you move into my bedroom. My mouth fell open. What? Liam barely reacted. It wouldn't make sense for my fiancé to sleep in the guest room. I felt my pulse race. But we're not actually together. His smirk deepened. I'm aware. So why? Because my grandmother will expect to see signs that we live like a couple. If she drops by unannounced, it has to look real. The thought of sharing a bed with him made my entire body heat. We don't have to sleep together, he added. I have a couch. You can have the bed. That made me pause. The idea of Liam Sinclair, billionaire and arrogant playboy, giving up his bed for me was surprising. He must have seen my hesitation because his smirk faded slightly. Is that going to be a problem? I forced myself to shake my head. No liar, Liam nodded. Good. Then we start tomorrow. Tomorrow? I repeated, panicking. Yes, I have a business event and you're coming as my fiancé. I opened my mouth to argue but shut it again. What was I supposed to say? This was part of the deal, so I swallowed my nerves and nodded. Fine, Liam's smirk returned. Good girl. I glared at him. He chuckled and turned away. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you're officially mine. I had never wanted to punch someone so badly in my life. I had never worn anything this expensive before. The dress Liam had given me, a sleek, black designer gown, fit like a second skin, accentuating curves I didn't even know I had. The diamond earrings and delicate bracelet felt heavy against my skin, a sharp reminder that this was not my world. Liam stood beside me, looking unfairly good in a tailored black suit. He had barely spoken to me since this morning. But now, as we stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, he leaned in. "Remember what I said," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Touch me. Smile. Make them believe." I stiffened, but before I could respond, his hand slipped around my waist. I sucked in a breath as his fingers brushed against my bare skin. Liam didn't react. He just guided me inside, his grip firm but effortless, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Heads turned as we entered. Whispers started instantly. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, but my heart pounded. Liam leaned down, his lips brushing my ear again. "Relax, relax," easy for him to say. A woman approached us, her sharp eyes flickering over me before settling on Liam. "Liam, and who is this?" Liam's grip tightened slightly. "This is Emma," he said smoothly. "My fiancée." The woman's eyes widened. "Fiancée?" I plastered a smile onto my face, hoping I didn't look as terrified as I felt. Liam turned to me. "Sweetheart, say hello, sweetheart." I almost choked on the word, but I knew I had to play along. So I smiled at the woman, and in a move that surprised even me, I turned to Liam and let my hand slide up his chest, resting against the fabric of his suit. Liam's body tensed, just for a fraction of a second. Then he relaxed, his gaze flickering down to me with something unreadable. "Hello," I said softly, tilting my head. The woman looked between us, clearly trying to process this shocking news. "Well," she finally said. "Congratulations," Liam nodded. "Thank you." As the woman moved on, Liam turned his head slightly, his voice low. "Not bad." I arched a brow. "Not bad?" He smirked. "You almost looked like you actually wanted to touch me." I huffed and turned away, but not before I caught the glimmer of amusement in his eyes. I was in deep. And the worst part, I wasn't sure if I wanted to find a way out. Chapter 6. Breaking the barriers. I had expected this arrangement to be difficult. I had expected awkwardness, forced intimacy, and the constant fear of being discovered. What I hadn't expected was Liam Sinclair being the most frustrating, infuriating, and dangerously charming man I had ever met. The gala had been a test, one that I had barely survived. I had forced myself to touch him, to smile, to let him wrap his arm around me like I belonged to him. And the worst part? It wasn't entirely unpleasant. Liam was dangerous, not because he was cold and calculating, but because when he wanted to be, he was warm, effortless. And I hated that. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Because no matter how much he smirked or how easily he played the role of my fiancé, this was all a game to him, and I wasn't about to be another one of his pawns. The morning after, I woke up in Liam's bed. Not with him, of course. He had kept his word, sleeping on the couch while I took the massive California king-sized bed. But waking up surrounded by luxury in a bed that smelled faintly of Liam's cologne was unsettling. I sat up, stretching, before padding to the bathroom. The gown from last night was crumpled on a chair, a silent reminder of the role I had played. I was engaged to a billionaire. And yet, here I was, staring at my reflection and wondering what the hell I had gotten myself into. I changed into one of the outfits Liam had given me, a simple cashmere sweater and leggings, far too expensive for my usual taste. But at least it was comfortable. As I stepped out of the room, the scent of coffee filled the air. Liam was in the kitchen, his broad back to me as he moved around effortlessly. He had ditched the suit for a fitted black t-shirt and sweats, and the sight was distracting. He looked so different like this, almost human. "Morning," he said without turning around. I hesitated. "Morning." He slid a cup of coffee toward me. "Black, no sugar, right?" I blinked. "How did you—" "You ordered it that way last night," he said simply, sipping his own. I frowned. "You remember how I take my coffee?" Liam smirked. "I pay attention. I wasn't sure how to feel about that." I took the coffee, savoring the warmth, before sitting across from him at the kitchen island. "So," he said, watching me over the rim of his cup, "you survived your first event as my fiancé." I rolled my eyes. "Barely. You did well." I raised a brow. "Is that a compliment?" "Don't get used to it," I huffed. Figures, silence stretched between us, but for once, it wasn't uncomfortable, and that scared me more than anything. Liam had arranged for me to visit Ethan at the hospital. It was the first time since this arrangement began that I felt like myself again. Seeing my little brother's face light up when I walked into the room made everything worth it. I rushed to his bedside, brushing his messy brown hair back. "Hey, buddy." "M." his tiny arms wrapped around my neck as I held him close. Liam stood near the door, watching quietly. Ethan pulled back, blinking up at him. "Who's that?" I hesitated. Liam stepped forward, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "I'm Liam." Ethan squitch. I nearly choked on my own laughter. Liam's lips twitched. "Something like that," Ethan hummed. "Do you have a spaceship?" Liam tilted his head. "Not yet." Ethan seemed to consider that. Then he grinned. "You're okay, I guess." Liam chuckled, and something warm settled in my chest. I hadn't expected him to interact with Ethan at all, let alone with patience and humor. I turned to my brother, smoothing a hand over his blanket. "How are you feeling?" "Okay. The doctor said I can have ice cream later." "Lucky," I teased. Ethan's smile faded slightly as he looked between us. "Are you my sister's boyfriend?" My stomach flipped. Liam, to his credit, didn't falter. "Something like that." Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer. I wasn't sure I was. I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was because of the way Liam had acted at the hospital, the way he had looked at Ethan like he was more than just a burden I carried. Or maybe it was because of the way Liam had looked at me, like he was starting to see me as something more than just a woman he had hired to play a part. I rolled onto my side, staring at the ceiling. This was dangerous. I couldn't afford to get attached to Liam, to his kindness, because this wasn't real, and I had learned the hard way. Falling for a man like Liam Sinclair only led to heartbreak. Chapter 7. The Bond That Won't Break. Emma hadn't expected the arrangement with Liam to affect her so deeply. She had prepared herself for his arrogance, his controlling nature, and his effortless charm. What she hadn't prepared for was the moments in between, the small gestures, the fleeting glances, the way he had spoken to Ethan as if he genuinely cared. Liam Sinclair wasn't the cold, untouchable billionaire the world thought he was, and that realization terrified her, because the more she saw of the man behind the mask, the harder it became to remember that this wasn't real. The Sinclair family's estate was a fortress of wealth and legacy. Emma had seen pictures of it before. Grand, sprawling gardens, a mansion so large it could house an entire village. But standing in front of it now, with Liam's firm grip on her waist, she felt completely out of place. Liam, however, looked completely at home. His expression was unreadable as they stepped inside, where a gathering of impeccably dressed guests murmured in hushed tones, eyes turned toward them, curiosity flickering through the air like a spark waiting to ignite. At the center of it all sat Eleanor Sinclair, Liam's formidable grandmother. She was regal, her silver hair pinned into a perfect twist, her posture as straight as a queen surveying her court. Her sharp eyes landed on Emma instantly, assessing, calculating. "So," Eleanor said, setting down her crystal glass, "this is her." Emma stiffened under the scrutiny but kept her head high. Liam, standing tall beside her, squeezed her waist lightly, a silent reminder to play the part. "This is Emma," Liam said smoothly. "My fiancée." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Instead, she studied Emma with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Interesting," Eleanor murmured. "You move fast, Liam." "I know what I want," Liam replied easily. Eleanor's lips pursed, her sharp gaze shifting back to Emma. "And you, dear, what is it that you want?" Emma knew a trap when she saw one. She met Eleanor's eyes, refusing to back down. To be with Liam. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but Emma swore she saw the ghost of amusement flicker across her face. Eleanor sipped her drink. "And how exactly did you meet?" Liam answered before Emma could. "It was fate." Emma shot him a quick glance, but he only smirked slightly, completely at ease. Eleanor sighed, as if bored. "Very well. You're engaged, then. I assume there will be a wedding soon?" Emma's stomach twisted. "A wedding?" Liam's smirk deepened. "Soon enough," Eleanor hummed, unconvinced. "You do realize, Liam," she said, swirling her glass, "that if this is all an act, I will find out." Liam's smirk vanished. There was no warmth in Eleanor's voice, no indulgence, no patience, just a quiet, calculated promise. Emma swallowed hard. She didn't need to be told twice. Eleanor Sinclair was not a woman to be fooled. But Liam, unfazed, simply pulled Emma closer, tilting her chin up slightly. "Then I guess we'll just have to make sure it's real," he murmured, his voice low, his gaze locked onto hers. Before Emma could process what was happening, Liam's lips brushed against hers. The world around them faded. It wasn't a deep kiss, not at first, just the softest press of lips, barely enough to be considered more than a whisper of contact. But then Liam deepened it, his hand cupping her jaw, his fingers warm against her skin. Emma gasped softly against his mouth, her hands instinctively gripping his shirt. It was just for show. It had to be. But the way his lips moved against hers, the way her heart pounded in her chest, told an entirely different story. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was breathless. Liam, however, looked completely unaffected. Eleanor raised a brow. Then she simply turned away, as if the kiss had answered all of her questions. But Emma knew better. This was only the beginning, and if she wasn't careful, she was going to lose herself in a game she never intended to play. Chapter 8. The Cracks in the Illusion. Emma hadn't stopped thinking about the kiss. It was supposed to be an act, a way to convince Eleanor Sinclair that their engagement was real. And yet, when Liam's lips had met hers, something had shifted. The problem wasn't the kiss itself. It was how effortlessly he had made it feel real, how easily her body had responded, how much she had wanted more. Now, as she stood in Liam's penthouse, watching him pour a glass of whiskey like nothing had happened, she felt like she was losing her grip on reality. "We need to talk," she blurted. Liam glanced at her over his glass, his expression unreadable. "About?" Emma folded her arms. "The kiss." His lips twitched, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Ah, yes, the kiss. I suppose that was your first time experiencing what it's like to be kissed by a Sinclair." Emma rolled her eyes. "Don't flatter yourself," Liam smirked, but he didn't push further. Instead, he leaned back against the counter, his posture infuriatingly relaxed. "Fine. You want to talk about the kiss? Let's talk." Emma hesitated. Now that she had his full attention, she wasn't sure what to say. She had expected him to deflect, to brush it off. But instead, he was looking at her like he was daring her to make this conversation meaningful. Finally, she exhaled. "We need boundaries." Liam took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Boundaries? Yes. If we're going to keep up this act, we need to be clear about what's real and what's not." Liam set his glass down. "I see. So kissing you like that was too real for you?" Emma stiffened. "That's not what It's fine if it was." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp. "If I remember correctly, you weren't exactly pulling away." Her face burned. "It caught me off guard," Liam chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Emma clenched her fists. "Liam, I'm serious. If we're not careful, we'll both start blurring the lines." Liam studied her for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "You're right." Emma blinked. "I am? Yes, which is why I think it's time we address something else." She frowned. "What?" Liam took another sip of his drink before setting it aside. Then he walked toward her, his gaze locked onto hers. Emma took an instinctive step back, but he caught her wrist, holding her in place. She sucked in a breath. "You're hiding something," he murmured. Emma's pulse stuttered. "Excuse me? You've been guarded since the moment we met. You agreed to this deal out of desperation, but I don't think it was just about your brother's surgery." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Liam's grip was firm, but not forceful. His eyes, intense and unreadable, searched hers, as if trying to pull out the truth she wasn't ready to share. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam didn't let go. Instead, he studied her for a long moment before finally releasing her wrist. "If you say so." But he didn't believe her, and that terrified her more than anything. Because if Liam Sinclair started digging, if he started really looking into her past, it was only a matter of time before he found out the truth. About Ethan. About the one night that had changed everything. And about the fact that he was the father of the son neither of them knew existed. Chapter 9. The Truth in the Shadows. Emma felt like she was walking a tightrope, and the more time she spent around Liam, the shakier her balance became. The moment he had accused her of hiding something, her entire body had gone cold. He didn't know, not yet. But the way he was watching her, the way he had felt the cracks in her story, made her panic. Because Liam Sinclair wasn't the kind of man to let go of a suspicion. And if he started looking, if he started piecing things together, it wouldn't be long before he found out about Ethan. And then what? Would he rip her son away from her? Would he see Ethan as nothing more than an obligation, a mistake from a drunken night neither of them had thought twice about? Emma had spent the last 5 years protecting her son. She wasn't about to lose him now. Liam had always been good at reading people. It was a skill he had perfected in boardrooms. a necessity when navigating the world of billion-dollar deals and cutthroat competitors. And Emma? She was a walking contradiction. She had fire, but she flinched when pressed too hard. She was fiercely protective of her brother, but something told him there was more to her story than just a sick sibling. She was hiding something, and he was going to find out what. That night, he sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, scrolling through a file he had pulled on Emma Carter. Basic information: 26 years old, single mother to a 5-year-old boy named Ethan Carter. That part had caught his attention. There was no father listed on the birth certificate, no legal documents connecting Ethan to anyone else. Liam frowned, his grip tightening around the glass. Something about that didn't sit right. A 5-year-old son. The math clicked in his head, fast and sharp. 5 years ago, he had been at a hotel that night, drinking too much, trying to forget the weight of his family's expectations. And he had been with someone. He hadn't remembered much beyond her scent, the way her body had felt against his, the way she had slipped away before he had even woken up. His stomach twisted. No, it wasn't possible. Was it? Liam's pulse pounded as he stared at the file. There was only one way to find out. Emma had barely slept. Ethan had fallen asleep in the room Liam had prepared for him, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside his safe little world. Emma, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking. Liam was getting too close. She needed to get out of this arrangement before he found out the truth. Knock, knock. Emma jumped at the sound of someone at her door. She took a deep breath, schooling her expression before opening it. Liam stood there, dressed in his usual suit, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" Emma's throat went dry. She stepped aside, letting him in. Liam walked past her, stopping in the center of the room. He turned slowly, his blue eyes locking onto hers with something dark and unreadable. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a white envelope. Emma's stomach dropped. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam's jaw tightened. "A DNA test." Her knees nearly buckled. No, no, no. "You went behind my back?" She choked out. Liam didn't flinch. "I needed answers." Emma's breath came in short gasps. "And?" Liam exhaled slowly, unfolding the paper. His hand was steady, but his voice was anything but when he said, "I am Ethan's father." The room spun. Emma clenched her fists, trying to breathe, trying to think, but there was nothing. Just a cold, terrifying silence between them. Liam's voice was quieter now. "How long have you known?" Tears burned in Emma's eyes. She swallowed hard. "I didn't know for sure." Liam's expression darkened. "But you suspected." Emma looked away. "Yes." Silence. Then, suddenly, Liam took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "You lied to me." Emma's heart cracked. "I was protecting him." From me, she didn't answer, because deep down she had been afraid of what Liam would do, of what this truth would mean. Liam let out a bitter laugh. "And now?" Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "Now I'm terrified you'll take him from me." Liam's eyes flashed with something unreadable, and then quietly he said, "I don't know what I'm going to do yet, Emma." And that was the worst answer of all. Chapter 10. The Fight for Control. Liam was everywhere. Ever since he found out the truth about Ethan, he had inserted himself into every part of my life, forcing decisions, demanding to be involved, and I hated how powerless it made me feel. For 5 years, I had built my life around protecting my son. I had fought to keep him safe, to make sure he never felt the absence of a father. And now Liam wanted to walk in and claim him, like he hadn't been missing all these years, like he hadn't been absent for everything. I sat across from him at the dining table, my stomach in knots. Liam, as usual, was composed, controlled, like he wasn't turning my entire world upside down. "We need to discuss logistics," he said smoothly, setting down his coffee. I clenched my jaw. "Logistics? For Ethan. Where he stays, how often he sees me. A schedule." I gripped the edge of the table. "You're talking like this is some kind of business deal." Liam's eyes flickered. "Isn't it?" "No," I snapped. "This is our son." His gaze darkened. "Exactly." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. I couldn't let him bulldoze me into this. I had to fight. "Ethan doesn't even know you," I said. "You can't just expect him to." "I expect him to have a father," Liam interrupted, his voice firm. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "And what if he doesn't want one?" Liam exhaled slowly, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. "He's a child, Emma. He doesn't know what he wants." I shook my head. No, you don't know what he wants. You don't know anything about him. Silence. For the first time, something flickered across Liam's face. Doubt. I pressed on. You missed his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. You weren't there when he got sick. You weren't there for anything. Liam's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand. I know I missed things, he said, his voice quieter now. But that wasn't my choice, I scoffed. You're right, it was mine, and I did what I had to do. Liam stood then, moving around the table, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating off him. I refused to back down. I'm not trying to erase the past, he said, his voice low. But I will be in his life, and you're going to have to accept that. His nearness sent a shiver down my spine, but I held my ground. Fine, I whispered. But we do this my way. Liam's lips twitched slightly, as if he appreciated my defiance. But I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a warning. She was right. I hated it, but she was right. I didn't know Ethan. I had no idea what he liked, what made him laugh, what scared him, and that killed me. I wasn't used to being on the outside, but that was exactly where I was, watching from a distance, trying to find a way in. And Emma? She was my gatekeeper. She held the power, and I had never been more determined to break through. Later that day, I found myself outside Ethan's room again. Emma had left to run errands, but I stayed behind, needing a moment to think. Ethan was sitting on the floor, playing with toy cars, his tiny hands guiding them across an imaginary track. He didn't notice me at first. I hesitated, unsure how to approach him. But then, as if sensing me, he looked up. Hi, he said simply, my chest tightened. Hey, he blinked up at me, curious but not afraid. Are you my sister's boyfriend? I nearly laughed in shock. I crouched down to his level. Your sister? Ethan nodded, looking completely unbothered by the question. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. Emma had him young. He had grown up seeing her as both a mother and an older sister figure, and judging by the way he said it, this wasn't the first time. You call your mom your sister? I asked, intrigued. Ethan shrugged. Sometimes. Mom says we're a team. So sometimes we pretend we're a big brother and little sister. Something about that struck me in a way I wasn't expecting. She had done everything to make sure Ethan never felt alone, and yet he had never known the truth. I forced a smile. I guess that makes sense, Ethan grinned. Yup. So are you her boyfriend? I hesitated. Before I could answer, he grabbed one of his toy cars and held it out. Do you know how to race? I smirked. Think you can beat me? Ethan's eyes lit up. I know I can. I took the car he handed me, watching as he set up the imaginary track. And just like that, I had my first real moment with my son. I returned home to the sound of laughter. Ethan's laughter. I froze in the doorway, my heart in my throat. Liam was sitting on the floor, racing toy cars with Ethan, a rare smile on his face. And Ethan? He looked happy, carefree. My stomach twisted. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. Not that Liam wouldn't care, but that he would. Because if he was really in Ethan's life, then there was no way I'd ever be able to keep my heart out of it. And that scared me more than anything. Emma was quiet at dinner. Too quiet. I knew what she was thinking. I was getting too close. She had spent years keeping Ethan to herself, and now she was watching me slip in piece by piece, and I wasn't stopping. After Ethan went to bed, I finally spoke. You told me he was your brother, I said evenly, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Emma stiffened, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I waited, watched, and then finally she sighed. I was scared. Her voice was quiet. When I found out I was pregnant, I was young, I had nothing, and I knew that if people found out the truth, they'd judge him. They'd judge me. I set my drink down. So you lied. Her eyes flashed. I protected him. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. I could have been angry. I could have thrown accusations, but I understood now. Emma had spent years keeping Ethan safe from a world that would have turned its back on them, and even now, she was terrified that I would do the same. I tapped my fingers against the table, thinking. Then, finally, I met her gaze. You don't have to protect him from me. She swallowed hard, uncertainty flickering across her face. I stood up, adjusting my cuffs. I'm going to the office. When I get back, well, talk more about arrangements. Emma's grip on her coffee mug tightened. Arrangements? For Ethan, I said simply. She didn't say anything, but her eyes darkened. I walked toward the door, pausing just before I stepped out. I turned slightly, meeting her gaze. This changes everything, Emma. Then I left, because no matter how much she tried to fight it, I wasn't giving up, not on my son, and not on her. Chapter 11. The Battle for Trust. I had never been more exhausted in my life, not physically, but emotionally. Everything was shifting too fast. One moment I had full control over my life. I had built a world where it was just Ethan and me, a safe, simple world where I made the rules. And now Liam Sinclair was tearing through that world like a hurricane, demanding a place, taking up space, and worst of all, Ethan liked him. I sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through my hair, my mind replaying the scene I had walked in on earlier. Ethan laughing, Liam smiling. It was dangerous, not just for Ethan, but for me. Because no matter how much I told myself this was all temporary, that Liam would get bored of playing dad and go back to his perfect billionaire life, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't leaving this time, and that terrified me. I sat in my office, staring at the city skyline, trying to process the fact that I had a son. The logical part of me was still trying to wrap itself around the situation. I had missed 5 years, 5 years of firsts, 5 years of his life. And I hated that. I wanted to be angry at Emma, to blame her for keeping me in the dark. But I knew the truth. She had been scared. And judging by the way she still looked at me, as if she expected me to rip Ethan away from her, I knew that fear hadn't gone away. I sighed, running a hand down my face. Emma Carter was the most stubborn woman I had ever met. And the worst part? I liked it. I had spent years surrounded by people who only told me what I wanted to hear, women who threw themselves happen. I clenched my fists. You don't know that. Yes, I do, he said firmly. I don't quit on things that matter, Emma. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing into my chest. This was real for him. I could see it now, and that terrified me. Emma was scared, not just for Ethan, but for herself. She thought I would hurt him, but she was more afraid that I would hurt her. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You need to start trusting me, Emma stiffened. That's not. Yes, it is. I cut her off. You're scared, Emma, and I get it. But I'm not going anywhere. Whether you like it or not, I'm here now. Her lips parted slightly, her breath hitching, and for the first time I saw it, the way her defenses cracked just for a moment. The part of her that wanted to believe me. The part of her that still remembered that night. The night that had started it all. The way she had looked at me. The way she had touched me. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away. This wasn't about us. This was about Ethan. And I couldn't afford to cross lines. Not yet. Not until she finally trusted me. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the conversation over and over again. I knew Liam wasn't giving up, but could I really let him in? Could I really trust him? I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. And I knew, no matter how much I tried to fight it, I had already started falling. And there was no way to stop it now. Chapter 12. The Walls Between Us, Trust. It was a fragile, dangerous thing, and Emma Carter guarded hers like a fortress. I had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, manipulating markets, controlling outcomes. But this was a different kind of war. One I had never fought before. I wanted to be in Ethan's life. That much was clear. But what I hadn't expected was how much I wanted to break through Emma's walls, too. She didn't trust me, not fully. And until she did, I would always be an outsider looking in. So I had to play the long game, and I had never lost a game in my life. Letting Liam in was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct told me to keep my guard up, to protect Ethan, to keep control over the life I had built. But I couldn't deny what was happening. Ethan was happy. Liam was making an effort. And worst of all, I didn't hate having him around. I should have. I wanted to. But the more I watched him with Ethan, the more I saw the way he was trying, really trying, the harder it became to keep my walls up. And I hated that. Because the last time I let someone in, I ended up pregnant and alone. I couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. Emma was avoiding me. I could see it in the way she barely met my gaze, the way she made sure we were never alone in the same room for too long. It was almost funny. Almost. I let it go for a while, waiting, watching. But after a week of this, I decided I had enough. So when I found her in the kitchen late one night, barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose bun, I saw my opening. She barely acknowledged me as I walked in, reaching for a glass of water. Are you going to keep pretending I don't exist? I asked, leaning against the counter. Emma stiffened. Then she sighed. I'm not avoiding you. I smirked. Really? She shot me a glare. I'm just processing. I studied her, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. You don't have to do this alone anymore, I said quietly. She swallowed hard, and then, barely above a whisper, she said, I don't know how. Something in my chest tightened. Emma Carter wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile, but she was scared. And for the first time, I realized just how much weight she had been carrying all these years. I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice. Then let me show you. Her breath hitched. She looked up at me, something raw and vulnerable flickering in her eyes. And for a moment, I thought she might let me in. But then she stepped back, shutting me out. Again. I can't, she whispered. And before I could say anything else, she was gone. I had almost kissed him. I had almost let him kiss me. And that was exactly why I had to stop this before it went too far. Liam was getting under my skin. And worse, I was starting to want him there. I couldn't let that happen. Because Liam Sinclair wasn't just a man, he was a storm. And if I let him in, he would tear through my carefully built life and leave nothing but wreckage behind. So I had to be smart. I had to be strong, even if it was killing me inside. I wasn't a patient man. But for Emma, I would wait, because she could fight me all she wanted, push me away, build her walls. But I had already decided she was mine. She just didn't know it yet. Chapter 13, The Storm We Can't Escape. I should have been furious. I should have demanded explanations, pressed for answers, something. Instead, I was drowning in the weight of it all. The realization that one night, one reckless, unforgettable night, had given me a son. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The way she had looked at me with fire in her eyes, challenging me with every word. The way she had let go, giving herself to me completely. And the way she had disappeared before I woke up, leaving me with nothing but the scent of her skin on my sheets. I had thought about her for weeks after that night. I hadn't even known her name. And now, years later, she stood before me, still trying to keep me at arm's length. Like I was the enemy. Like she didn't know that she had been mine from the moment I touched her. I wasn't going to let her run this time. Liam's silence was worse than his anger. I had expected him to yell, to demand why I had kept Ethan from him. But instead, he was just watching me, like he was trying to unravel me piece by piece. And I hated how easy it was for him to do that. I crossed my arms, forcing myself to stay strong. Say something, Liam exhaled, rubbing his jaw. You left before I woke up. The quiet statement caught me off guard. I swallowed hard. I searched for you. My breath hitched. You did? His jaw tightened. Of course I did. I had never considered that. I had assumed I had been just another woman to him, another one-night stand. But the way he was looking at me now, like he had wanted more, made my stomach twist painfully. You disappeared, he said, his voice lower now. And then I find out years later that you had my son. I felt my eyes burn. I was scared, Liam. His expression didn't soften. And now, I clenched my fists. Now, I don't know what happens next. Liam stepped closer. I do. I held my breath as he leaned in, his voice a quiet promise. I don't walk away, Emma, and somehow that scared me more than anything. She was breaking. I could see it in the way her body swayed slightly toward mine, in the way she inhaled sharply when I got too close. Emma Carter was strong, but she wasn't immune to me, just like I wasn't immune to her. My fingers brushed against her wrist, the touch barely there, but she felt it. Her lips parted slightly, her breath uneven. And for a moment, I thought she might let go, that she might finally let me in. But then Ethan's voice broke the silence. Mom? Emma jerked back as if burned, turning toward the hallway where our son stood, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Her entire expression changed in an instant. She was no longer the woman standing too close to me, no longer the woman trying to fight whatever was between us. She was his mother, and that would always come first. I understood that, but I wasn't giving up. Not on my son. And not on her. Liam didn't push me after that night, but I could feel it. His presence, his determination, the way he was waiting. He was patient, too patient, and it was driving me insane. Because the more he was around, the harder it became to convince myself that I didn't want him to be. He was spending time with Ethan, forming a bond so effortlessly that it made my heart ache. And the worst part, Ethan was thriving. He had always been a happy kid, but now he was even more alive, more excited. He talked about Liam constantly. It was only a matter of time before he started asking questions. Questions I wasn't ready to answer. But time wasn't on my side anymore, because Liam wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. A week passed. I was playing the long game, giving Emma time. But I was done waiting. So when I found her alone in the kitchen, I didn't hesitate. "We need to talk," I said, leaning against the counter. Emma tensed. "About?" I arched a brow. "Don't play dumb." She sighed, setting down the dish towel in her hands. "Liam, no more games, Emma." I cut her off. "No more running." She swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. "I'm not running," she whispered. I stepped closer. "Then stop acting like you still don't want me." Her breath hitched. I saw the war inside her. I could feel it. "You think I don't remember?" I asked, my voice lower now. "The way you looked at me that night?" Emma's lips parted slightly. I kept going. "The way you let me touch you?" A quiet gasp escaped her, and that was it. That was all it took. I grabbed her waist, pulling her against me. She let out a soft, strangled sound, her hands flattening against my chest, and then she melted. Her body softened, her lips parting as she tilted her head up. For a second, I just stared at her, at the woman who had haunted me for years. Then I kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, desperate. Years of tension, of unspoken truths, of all the what-ifs crashing into one moment. Her fingers curled into my shirt, her body arching against mine. I deepened the kiss, my grip tightening, and for a moment there was nothing else. No past, no future. Just us. Breathless, hungry, unstoppable. But then Emma pulled away. Her eyes were wide, her lips swollen, her breathing ragged. I can't," she choked out. I clenched my jaw. "Emma, no," she said, shaking her head. "This isn't. I don't trust this." My chest tightened. I wasn't expecting a confession, but I had gotten one anyway. She didn't trust me. I swallowed the sting of that realization, exhaling slowly. "Then tell me what I have to do," I said quietly. Emma looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Then she whispered, "I don't know." And that was the problem. Because until she figured it out, I was stuck in this in-between, waiting for a woman who didn't know if she could love me again. But I was done waiting. I was going to make her trust me, even if it killed me. Chapter 14, The Final Stand. I had never been so close to losing control. Liam Sinclair had always been dangerous. Not in a violent way, but in the way that he stripped me bare with a single look, like he could see past my defenses even when I wasn't ready to let him in. And now he was forcing me to decide, to stop running, to face the truth. I wanted him. I had always wanted him. But I was terrified, because the last time I gave in to him, I ended up pregnant and alone. What if he left? What if he changed his mind? What if this was just another game to him? I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting Ethan. And that meant I couldn't afford to be reckless with my heart. Not again. Emma Carter was the most infuriating woman I had ever met, and I had never wanted anyone more. She thought she could push me away, that if she ran far enough, I would eventually give up. She didn't realize that I had already decided. She was mine, and I wasn't going anywhere. I let her go that night, let her catch her breath, but I wasn't giving up. I had given her space, given her time, and now I was done waiting. Emma was in the kitchen when I walked in, her back to me. Ethan was still asleep, giving us a rare moment alone. I leaned against the counter, watching her. "We need to talk." She sighed but didn't turn around. "Liam, I'm not walking away," I said firmly, her hands stilled on the countertop. "I know you don't trust me," I continued. "I know you think he'll leave, that this won't last." Emma swallowed hard. "Liam," I stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice lower now. "You, me, Ethan, we're a family, and it's time you start accepting that." She turned to face me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You can't just decide that," she whispered. I smirked. "I just did." Her lips parted, but no words came out. And that was when I knew I was winning. I hated him, hated how confident he was, how sure, like he had already made the decision for me, and I had no choice but to fall in line. But that wasn't how this worked. I had spent my whole life fighting for control, clawing my way through every obstacle, making sure no one had the power to hurt me again. And now Liam was tearing through my walls like they were nothing. And the worst part? I wanted him to. I wanted to believe him, to believe that this could be real. but believing meant risking everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I gave her a choice, a final stand. I didn't push, didn't force. I just looked her in the eyes and said the one thing I knew she wasn't ready to hear. I love you. Emma inhaled sharply. What? I smirked. You heard me. Her hands trembled at her sides. You don't mean that, she whispered. I took a step closer, tilting her chin up until she had no choice but to look at me. Yes, I do, I murmured. And you can keep fighting it all you want, but we both know the truth. Her eyes filled with something raw, something vulnerable. And then, finally, she shattered. Her hands fisted in my shirt as she pulled me down, her lips crashing against mine in a kiss that was years in the making. It wasn't soft, it wasn't sweet. It was fire and desperation, hunger and surrender. And it was real. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her against me, like I would never let her go, because I wouldn't. Not now, not ever. I had lost, but for the first time, losing didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like freedom, like finally letting myself breathe. I loved him. I had always loved him. And now I was finally ready to admit it. I pulled away just enough to whisper, I love you too. Liam grinned. Took you long enough. I rolled my eyes. Shut up and kiss me. He did. And this time, I didn't run. Chapter 15, The Forever We Choose. I had spent years running from the past, running from my feelings, running from him. But now I was done running. I had chosen him. I had chosen us. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was embracing it. With him, with Ethan, with our family. I had always gotten what I wanted: power, wealth, control. But none of it had ever felt like this. Like waking up to the woman I loved curled against me, her breathing slow and even. Like hearing my son's laughter echo through my home. Like knowing, without a doubt, that I belonged to them. I had spent years searching for something I couldn't name. And now I had it. Not because I had taken it, but because Emma had finally given it to me. And that meant more than anything. 1 month later, Emma stood in the middle of the room, wearing my ring on her finger. Ethan was sitting on my lap, chattering excitedly about something, his tiny hands waving in the air. And me, I was just watching them, soaking it all in, my family, my world. Emma caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. What? I smirked. Just thinking. About? I shrugged. How I'm never letting you go. Her lips twitched. Is that so? I tightened my hold on Ethan, ruffling his hair. What do you think, buddy? Should I keep your mom forever? Ethan grinned. Forever and ever. Emma rolled her eyes. Well, if Ethan says so, I chuckled, standing up and pulling her against me, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. Forever, I murmured. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had everything I had ever wanted, because I had them, and I wasn't letting go. Not now, not ever. Chapter 16, A Love That Lasts. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I would be standing here, married to Liam Sinclair, holding his hand while Ethan ran ahead of us, I wouldn't have believed them. But here we were, happy, whole, a family. It still felt surreal sometimes. How much had changed, how much I had fought against this, and how much I had needed it without realizing. Liam had broken down every wall I had built, not with force, but with patience, with persistence, with love. And now I couldn't imagine my life without him. Emma Carter had been the biggest surprise of my life, and the best damn thing that had ever happened to me. She had given me a son, a home, a reason to be more than just a businessman with an empty life. I had spent years building an empire, chasing success, thinking that was what I wanted. But nothing felt as good as coming home to her. To them. To us. 2 years later, Ethan ran through the backyard, his laughter echoing in the warm evening air. Emma stood beside me, her hand resting on her stomach, where our second child was growing. I placed my palm over hers, feeling the tiny movement beneath. My chest tightened. I had thought having one child I didn't know about for years was shocking enough. But this, knowing from the very beginning, being there for everything, it was something else entirely, something I would never take for granted. Emma turned to me, her eyes soft. Did you ever think this would be your life? I smirked. No, her lips twitched. Do you regret it? I leaned in, pressing my forehead against hers. Not for a damn second. She smiled, her fingers curling into my shirt. Good, because you're stuck with us forever, Sinclair. I kissed her slowly, savoring the moment, the warmth of her, the certainty of her. Forever, I promised, and I meant it, because Emma Carter had once been the woman I lost, Now, she was the woman I would never let go. Not now. Epilogue. A love that stands the test of time. 5 years ago, I found out I had a son. 5 years ago, I realized I had lost time I could never get back. But today, I had everything I ever wanted, everything I never knew I needed. I stood in the backyard of our estate watching Ethan chase his baby sister Sophia as she giggled uncontrollably, her tiny legs wobbling as she tried to escape his grasp. Emma sat on the porch, a soft smile on her face, one hand resting on her growing belly, another child, another miracle. I had once believed that love was a weakness, that attachment only led to disappointment. But now, I knew better. Love wasn't a weakness. It was my greatest strength. If someone had told me years ago that I would be here, married to Liam Sinclair, raising our children together, loved beyond measure, I would have laughed. Because I had spent so much time believing that love wasn't meant for me, that he wasn't meant for me. But I had been wrong. Liam had proven that over and over again, in the way he loved me, in the way he loved our children. He wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And that was what made this real. As I watched him lift Sophia into the air, her squeals of laughter filling the evening sky, I felt it, that unshakable certainty, that forever we had promised each other. And I knew no matter what life threw at us, we would always stand strong, together. Emma walked toward me, her eyes filled with something soft and familiar, love. She slid her arms around my waist, resting her head against my chest. I held her close, inhaling the scent of home. "Are you happy?" she whispered. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, my voice steady and sure. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She smiled. "Good, because this is forever, Liam." I cupped her face, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to look at me. "I know," I murmured, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." Then, as the sun set behind us, as our children's laughter filled the air, I kissed my wife. Not just as a promise, but as a fact. This wasn't just a love story. This was our story. And it was only just beginning. The end.
Written by Maria. Thank you all for taking the time to dive into this story with me. I truly appreciate your support and love hearing your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey filled with passion, drama, and unexpected twists, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. There's so much more to come, and I can't wait to share it all with you. Stay tuned for more incredible stories, and as always, thank you for being part of this amazing journey. See you in the next one.